Can everybody see me? Can everybody hear me? Yes, is that okay? Jolly good. In that case, I'll make a start. So, welcome all of you to the third in our series of lectures. So this week we are staying in Greece, but and we're staying on the mainland. So we are mainly around the Peloponnese, but we'll go to a couple of other places as well. But whereas last week we visited the classical sites, the archaeological sites, this week I want to take you to show you some of the other beautiful sites and the towns around mainland Greece. I'm afraid we're hopping around a little bit. I've called my talk a Byzantine legacy. That was really for want of a better title, because I couldn't really think how to put everything under one umbrella title. So forgive me a little bit if it doesn't all fit neatly into the theme of the talk in the way perhaps that the other ones did previously. So just as in other weeks, the format will be that I will talk for 45 minutes, and then there will be a time at the end for some questions before we go off, and at least those of us here in England can go and have our supper. So I'm going to start off with taking you to one of my favorite towns in Greece, and that is the town of Nafplio here. It's on the Argolid Gulf here, so it's on the coast. It's surrounded by mountains, and it's about a couple of hours drive from Athens. So very easy to get to. I mean, you could just go for a day trip from Athens, but I think it's really nice to go and to stay in Nafplio. There are some nice hotels, plenty of very nice restaurants, and it has a beautiful, relaxed atmosphere to it. So here we are in the central square, for example, and it's very pleasant just wandering the streets. It's not too touristy, and even I was there in September time, and even in September you can see there are not too many people around. It's not sort of a huge, it's not like visiting the Acropolis or something like that. And also, as I said, it's on the shore, and one of the lovely things to do is to just sit in one of the cafes by the harbor, and you look out over this beautiful view, this rather lovely Venetian fortress guarding the entrance to the harbor, and in the background beautiful hills, and this is looking over to the west. So if you're there in time for an aperitif, you see the sun sink behind the hills. You watch the sunset over the water, which is rather lovely. So although Nafplio existed in ancient times, it was never terribly significant. But in the 13th century, it awoke from obscurity when it fell into the hands of a group of French crusading knights. And they were the ones who built, you can just see up on the top of the hill, a fortress. And from then on, it became a very important fortress, not just in the time of the Crusades, but throughout the whole of history. This fortress has been added to significantly over the years. At the end of the 14th century, the town was sold to the Venetians, and it remained in their possession until it was taken by the Ottomans in the mid-16th century. The Venetians then recaptured it in 1685, and kept it for 30 years until once again it became the territory of the Ottomans. And then finally, it was captured by the Greek nationalist forces in 1822 after a siege lasting for more than a year. Finally, the Ottoman forces were forced to surrender through starvation. So since 1822, of course, it has been in the hands of the Greeks. And indeed, Nafplio was the capital of the fledgling Greek state from 1822 onwards. But this table tennis history between Venetians and Ottomans very much explains the architecture of the city. So you have very beautiful, I wouldn't necessarily say Venetian, but certainly very Italian style palazzi around, very elegant, formal architecture. But then you also get something like this, the beautiful 18th century Voulev-Khan Mosque, which incidentally once housed the very first Greek parliament, the first Hellenic parliament, we should perhaps say. In fact, there's a nice story in the legend, if you like, behind the building of this mosque. And the story tells that in 1730, two brothers from Venice, they came back to Nafplio because they were searching for some treasure that their father had apparently left before he had been forced to flee back to Venice. They found the treasure, but as soon as they found it, they were murdered by a Turkish Aga, and he kept the gold for himself. But then a short while later, this Aga repented, haunted by his guilt. He used the gold for building this beautiful mosque. And as you can see from this photograph, the whole of the town overlooks what is actually quite a busy harbour. It's not quite big enough, thankfully, to attract the huge cruise ships, but it does get, I think, you can just see two masts here. Some of the smaller boats come into Nafplio. So plenty of traffic to keep it lively, but not too much to mean that it's ever too touristy. So as I say, one of my favorite towns to stay when on the Greek mainland. But we're going to move off now, and I want to take you to another of my favorite places in the Peloponnese, which is Mistras. But before we get to Mistras, I'm going to take you on a short drive, which was a drive that I did from Kalamata. Kalamata, you've probably heard of Kalamata olives. Kalamata is very much the place of olives in Greece. But you can maybe see on this map, this little yellow road, which winds through the Tigritus Mountains and is a stunning route, I think, a very, very beautiful road. So just want to show you a few photographs of the route. So we start off near Kalamata. You can see here the olive trees with their silvery leaves, mountains in the background, forests of umbrella pines. But very soon, leaving Kalamata, we head into this fabulous gorge and travel. You can see the road, I think, just here. Very often it's in the, I did this journey at 6 o'clock in the morning, actually, because it was quite hot time of year. I think it was probably July when I was there, or maybe August, I can't remember. And I think it was probably about 5 or 6 o'clock in the morning when I took this route, winding up through the Tigris Mountains. And eventually, this is Mount Tigris here. And here I am. This photograph was taken from the castle at Mistra. So here we are, we've arrived at Mistra. And I think Mistra is one of the most exciting and dramatic sites in the whole of the Peloponnese. It was originally a Frankish castle. You can see the castle up here on the top of the hill. Again, when we say Frankish castle, we invariably mean a Crusader castle from the 12th century. But the Franks were driven out by the Byzantines in 1262, and Mistra became the capital of the Byzantine despotate of Morea. Now, Morea was the Byzantine word, or the old Greek word, for the Peloponnese. So if you like, Mistra was the Byzantine capital of in the Peloponnese throughout the Middle Ages. So it flourished in particular in the 14th and 15th centuries. And in those days, the population of Mistra was something like 20,000 people. It was the principal cultural and intellectual center of the Byzantine world after, of course, Constantinople, which we are going to go and visit next week in our lecture on Istanbul. Then during the Ottoman period, it was largely uninhabited, and then it was completely abandoned at the inception of the new Greek state and the birth of the modern town of Sparta. And the modern town of Sparta, you can't quite see it in this photograph, but it's somewhere down here on the plain, so slightly out of shot. But what there is, of course, today, excuse me, are some of these beautiful multi-dome churches, some monasteries, and so forth. The most famous of the court philosophers was a man by the name of Gemisthus Platon. He was a humanist philosopher, and he argued, he was very forward thinking for his time. He argued that land should be redistributed among the laborers. And he also argued that reason should be placed on a par with religion. So perhaps predictably, he was quickly excommunicated from Mistra, but nevertheless, his teachings became popular in Renaissance Italy. And certainly he crops up there. But originally he was from Mistra. So essentially, a visit to Mistra involves strolling around some of these beautiful Byzantine, as I say, multi-dome churches with beautiful apses, some beautiful brickwork here, lovely tile work of the roofs and stonework and so forth. And in many of the churches, there are still some fabulous Byzantine frescoes. So this one, for example, of the Christ Pantocrator, surrounded by the apostles here, and here we have the four evangelists in the corner. Unfortunately, as with all things, the churches with the most fabulous frescoes and mosaics and so forth, unfortunately, you're not allowed to take photographs, which is rather frustrating. So I don't have photographs of the best of the frescoes, but take it from me, There are some beautiful frescoes there, and some of the finest of the Byzantine world of the 14th and 15th centuries. This here is the museum, and in fact, there in the background of this picture, you can see the modern town of Sparta over there. In fact, quite a comical fact actually is in the 18th century, just to go back to one of the earlier slides, the visitors on the grand tour to this part of the world, I think I mentioned last week that there is very little left of ancient Greek Sparta. And when the travelers on the grand tour came to Mistra, they thought that this was actually ancient Sparta. Of course, it's not at all. Of course, it's Byzantine, Mistra. But they were confused a little bit in this way. Okay, we'll leave Mistra now, and I want to take you to a port on the coast, the port of Monemvasia, which is down here in the very southeastern corner of the Peloponnese. But even though it is quite a long distance from Mistra, it was actually the port for medieval Mistra. That was essentially how it acquired its importance. Now, originally, Monemvasia was quite simply a rock off the coast, an island to all intents and purposes, which in 1971, the Greek state built a causeway to join this rock to the mainland. So here I am, I'm standing at the top of the rock, and I'm looking down onto the little town of Monemvasia. Now, Monemvasia, the name of the town, derives from two Greek words, mone and envasia, which means single entrance, because actually even today, the only way to get into this town is via a little gate, a little doorway in this port castle here that you can see up in the top right-hand side of the picture, because all of the rest of the town is completely surrounded by this cliff that you can see. So over here on the left-hand side, there's no way to get round the cliff there, and indeed there's no real way to get to the sea, because there's a defensive wall between the town and the sea, and the port of Monemvasia itself is actually round the corner. So that explains why today in Monemvasia there is no traffic, there are no roads, there are no cars. All there are these beautiful little alleyways, such as the one in this photograph. And in fact, this picture here is the main street of Monemvasia. So if you arrive with too much luggage, you have a problem, because there's no big hotels either. There's only little pensions, little bed and breakfasts, and you invariably have to wheel your suitcase or your luggage over the cobbles and through the streets to get to your accommodation. But I put this photo in because this is about as crowded as it gets. No cruise ships can get here. A few little gift shops. This is the main street. This photo was taken at 7 o'clock in the evening, and you can see, to all intents and purposes, more or less deserted. Very, very, very beautiful little town. Now, I mentioned that it was founded as the commercial port for the town of Mistra. And what the merchants were shipping was invariably wine. The old Malvasia wine. Now, the Malvasia wine, of course, was not grown here in the town. It was grown roundabout in the farmland in this southeastern peninsula. The Latin name, the Italian name, if you like, for this wine is Malvasia. And this is the very same wine that if you travel to the Aeolian Islands, especially to Lipari and Salina, you will taste this. Invariably, it's a sweet wine, a dessert wine, the Malvasia wine. In English, we call it Malmsey. But the name derives originally from the Greek. Monemvasia is where this wine originated from. Here I am in the main town square, just as the sun is setting behind me, looking up to this great rock. There's a few, you can see some of the little domed churches. And then I climbed up to the top of the rock, looking down on these lovely domed churches. One of the extraordinary things is that back in the 16th century, this small, tiny town was home to about 40 separate churches and no less than 800 separate houses. So they really were squashed in like sardines in a tin. So here we are. I climbed up to the top. This is an old Turkish hammam on the top, looking out across the headland. This is over to the Mani, actually, and a little sort of schooner ship sailing out there. A ruined church on the top. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to gain entrance to it. And here again, down at the bottom, looking up to the castle with some of the churches down below. And invariably, the beautiful bougainvillea that you find everywhere throughout the Mediterranean. So we're leaving Monemvasia now, and we're heading back to the north, back via Nafplio. But I always like to take the mountain roads, the minor roads, so I preferred not to go back to the main road and travel up this way. So we travel through the mountains, and lo and behold, this is one of the delights of traveling through rural Greece. You come across these beautiful, just little villages in the middle of nowhere, everybody just sitting out in the cafe under this is a plane tree here, in the shade of the plane tree, sitting down, having their mid-morning coffee, which invariably sort of goes on till lunchtime. This was the village of Cosmas, I think was what it was called. So traveling further north, I want to take you to a very interesting site called Osias Loukas, very near actually to Delphi. Delphi, which we visited last week, is just up here. So Osias Loukas is really just about 20 minutes, half an hour's drive from Delphi. And there at Osias Loukas is another of these fabulous Byzantine monasteries. So this one is contemporary with the ones that we saw in Mistra just now. It is somewhat larger, and it is still a working monastery. there are only about half a dozen monks living in cells around this courtyard here. But nowadays it very much functions as a museum, and it's open, I think, every day to receive visitors to go and look at the fabulous frescoes, but also some of the Byzantine mosaics. Now, unfortunately, I don't have very good photographs of the mosaics there. The mosaics are quite high up, and I only had with me my mobile phone. I didn't have a camera with me on this occasion. These mosaics are contemporary with many of the Byzantine mosaics that we see in the Norman churches in Palermo. And one of the things that struck me when I saw these mosaics, I just thought, wow, that's the Palatine Chapel in Palermo. So this what you're looking at here is the baptism of Christ, and the archangels are bringing the robes. So he's being baptized, of course, by John the Baptist, but the archangels are bringing the robes with which to clothe him after the baptismal ceremony. But the robes that they are bringing him are the robes of the clothes of the Byzantine emperor. And we see exactly the same depiction in the Palatine Chapel. And in fact, you've probably heard tour guides telling you there that, yes, it could be the baptism of Christ. It could also be the baptism of King Roger II of Sicily. Of course, here in Greece, Roger II has nothing to do with it. We're not looking at Roger II at all. But nevertheless, that is the comparison that is made. And in fact, in the next slide, I managed to find another photograph of the mosaics in Palermo. So this here on the left-hand side is the mosaic of Osius Lucas. It shows the nativity scene, the birth of Jesus Christ. Here is the Holy Spirit descending from heaven. We have the archangels here. We have the shepherds arriving with their animals. And here we have the three kings dressed as angels. Contrast that with the nativity scene in the Martorana church in Palermo. It's almost identical. Virgin Mary with baby Jesus, the Holy Spirit descending from heaven, the animals in the manger, the archangels here visiting the scene. It's almost identical. And that's because these Byzantine mosaics worked to a formula. The mosaicists were, they already had the idea for the scene that they were going to portray. And the same goes for Palermo as went for Osius Lucas. So a very interesting visit to the monastery of Osius Lucas. I'm going to bypass Delphi for now, and I want to take you to what I think is really an extraordinary place, Meteora. Meteora is about 3.5 hours drive from Athens altogether. And the extraordinary thing about Meteora is this phenomenal geology, these extraordinary rock formations. Now, these were sedimentary deposits. They were left in about 25 million years ago when this area of Greece was covered by the sea. The sea, of course, receded, or rather the land pushed up, and they were subsequently eroded by the Pineos River but then also by, this is wind erosion that you can see here. So that's how these geological forms were created. But you get these beautiful landscape, which I always think is reminiscent a little bit of somewhere like Cappadocia in Turkey. Except that here in Meteora, and indeed the name, I should tell you, Meteora, means suspended in mid-air. And therein lies the clue, because here in Meteora, we have these incredible monasteries perched on the top of these rocks. And so these are medieval monasteries, so dating mainly from the 14th century, although the legend credits St. Athanasios with founding the earliest hermitage in the 10th century. And to arrive up there, he flew up there on the back of an eagle. However, in the Middle Ages and today, if you want to visit them, the only way is to climb up via a ladder. Otherwise, if you don't want to go via the ladder, you can go via the zip wire here. You can just see in this picture here. When I was doing some background reading for this lecture, I looked up what Patrick Leigh Fermor, you must have heard of Patrick Leigh Fermor, he's the great traveller to Greece just before the Second World War, and has written some fabulous books on travelling through Greece. If you haven't read any of his books, I really recommend to go and look at them. Patrick Leigh Fermor is his name. When he came to Meteora, so this was the late 1930s, he was traveling. He, to get to these monasteries, he was hauled up in a basket on the end of a rope. And when he got to the top, he said to, well, before I get to that, there's a lovely description of the rope, which he describes as being about the width or the thickness of a man's wrist. And when he got to the top, he asked the priest, he said, "How often do you change the rope?" And the priest just looked at him with a very deadpan face and said, "Well, only whenever it breaks." So getting to these monasteries is quite a challenge. But of course, I'm teasing you, because nowadays there is, in fact, a little bridge. You can cross over the bridge, and then you can see some steps going up to the top. So there we go. Here's the same monastery here. And there's the bridge there. So you can arrive, you can actually drive. There's a car park. I think you can see the car park here. And then you walk along and you can get to it. And it's great fun visiting these monasteries. There's about half a dozen of them altogether. They are not open every day. So you can't, if you go for one day, you can't visit all of them in one day, but you can certainly visit 3 or 4 of them and get a nice feel for what they are like. Inside the monasteries, you can't actually visit the monks' cells, but you can visit the churches. There's some beautiful gardens, and just pottering around is rather a fun thing to do. And if you are there at dusk, there we go. If I just move that a little bit, invariably you'll see people standing on the rocks, watching the sunset, and getting some fabulous views of the sunset behind that. So that is Meteora, a truly fabulous destination, which is really, really fun to visit. And so lastly, I mentioned last week that invariably any visit to Greece, you are going to fly in and out of probably Athens, and of course you're almost certainly going to go and visit the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the museums there, and so on and so forth. But what I wanted to do is just finish off the last 5 minutes or so to maybe give you some ideas for things to do apart from the archaeology of Athens. So I want to spend 5 or 10 minutes in Athens itself. So this is the what's known as the Vouli, the Greek Parliament building. You probably recognize it. You can see the Greek flag flying from the roof here. And down here is what is known as Syntagma Square. You can probably see 2 little sentry boxes here. And if you're there at 11 o'clock, I think it is, they have a fantastic changing of the guards ceremony, which is really fun to watch, which is good fun to go and see. So this is obviously kind of your starting point in Athens. But just to get your bearings a little bit, I don't know if this makes sense, but we'll try anyway. So this is a sort of Google Street View of Google Map of Athens. So this is the Parliament building and Syntagma Square you see here. This here is the Acropolis building here, the Agora, some of the for example, the Temple of Hephaestus that I showed you last week. But there's plenty of other things to explore in Athens, not least this whole area here, which is known as the Plaka, which is a little bit touristy, probably as you'd expect, being so close to the Acropolis, but really worth exploring. And then this beautiful area here, just underneath the Acropolis, and just wandering around there, it's like being in a little village, if you like, almost. You come across these beautiful little houses and sort of fruit trees, and there's lovely restaurants and so forth. And you would never believe here that you are literally just beneath the Acropolis and above the Plaka, in just a couple of 100 meters from one of the most touristy areas of Europe. And then there's a street. So this is all modern area here. There's a street called Ermou, which goes to Monasteraki. This is where this is. And Ermou is very nice to walk along. It's a pedestrian street with some very ugly, I have to say, modern buildings either side. But right in the middle of this is this beautiful little church, what is known as Hieros Naos. And it's kind of a meeting place for all of Athens. If ever you have a meeting with somebody, invariably it will be here. And if you come here, very often there are buskers performing outside, or street musicians, or acrobats, or goodness knows what. So quite a sort of a fun place to visit, and a very unlikely place, preserved amidst some very ugly modern buildings. But if you carry on walking along Ermou, you get to Monasteraki, which is here. And this is Monasteraki. It's a very busy place. It's a transport hub. There's a metro station here. There are bus stations here, and so forth. So a lot of people coming and going. I was there. This was taken in December time, this time last year, actually. And there's this lovely mosque here, what's known as the Tsitsaraki Mosque, dating from the 18th century. And what tour guides like to point out, however, is that just exactly where I'm standing, you can look up, you can see the Parthenon up here on the Acropolis, and you can also see a lovely Greek Orthodox church here in the middle distance. So you've got the three religions, the Muslim religion, Greek Orthodox, and also the ancient religion, all in the same site. And just behind Monastiraki, this is where I want to finish up, is so if I turn around from where my photograph is taken, turn 180 degrees, I'm in this district called Psiri. And I just want to spend a few minutes in this district because, so I went there last December. I was a guest of the Greek Tourist Board. They pay for your flight and they sort of put you up, and they hope that you're going to take lots of people to stay in Greece. Of course, that's what they want to do. But one of the things that they did was they organized a food tour around this area called Psiri, which is on paper, it's nothing very special. But it was really great fun, and I want to share this with you a little bit. So the district of Psiri is an old working class district. You won't find many tourists there. This is why it was such fun. So here we are. As you can see, it was December, just before Christmas. But you do get a lot of young Athenians coming here. This is where they know to come and meet up for a nice snack. Lots of restaurants and cafes and so forth. This place here is where you go to eat a quite a sort of famous Greek dish known as bogatsa, which is a kind of, I suppose it's a sort of pastry, really, but it can be flavored with all sorts of things. So for example, cream or cheese, or with spinach, so you can have both sweet one, or you can have a savory one, cheese one. You can also have all the different flavors are here on the board, and it's a very nice sort of snack, but it's absolutely delicious. And this is a famous place where everybody's queuing to go inside that. This was evidently the basket makers street, I think. And this was rather fun. They took us to this shop with all these sausages. So there were cheeses, obviously, but sausages and garlics hanging up from the ceiling. And this is something called bastırma, which I recognize from Turkey. I mean, it is originally a Turkish word. It means pressed, so pressed meat. But the interesting thing that they were telling us, that the guys running this shop were Armenians, and in fact the origin of this pressed meat is actually not Turkish at all, but Armenian. And then they took us to, of course, we had to go and visit a cafe. And now, coming from Italy, I thought the Italians were the world's great coffee drinkers. It wasn't until I came to Athens that I realized that the Greeks are far outdo the Italians for drinking coffee. They seem to drink it throughout the whole day. Goodness knows how they ever sleep. And so many different flavors. These are all different flavorings here of coffee. This is this huge grinder for grinding the coffee, and so many different ways of having your coffee. You can have it sweet or without sugar. You can have it like an espresso. You can have it frappe. You can have cappuccino. You can have, oh goodness knows how many ways. And then finally, they took us to this rather fun place. You probably heard of this. In Greek, it's called gyros, and it's just simply kebab. It's exactly the same as the Turkish kebab, but this is the Greek version of it. This Greek, as it's called in Greek, gyros, but it's, to all intents and purposes, just a doner kebab. So a lot of fun, and so it's possible to eat very, very cheaply, you know, just a few euros or something, and have really lots of delicious things to taste, and of course washed down with lovely Greek beer and Greek wine and so forth. So anyway, there I think I've come to the end of my presentation, so I will stop sharing my screen. We'll return back to the room. Lara, if you would like to unmute people, and if anybody's got any comments, any questions, anything that you'd like to add to what I've just said, by all means. And
I think it's
okay.
done.
So you should all be able to unmute yourselves now. If you'll probably have to go down to a find the mute symbol and sort of unmute yourselves. Anybody got any questions?
Robert, unmute.
I've got one as usual.
Oh yes.
Good.
Go on,
Yes,
fire away. Yes.
When you were in Mistras,
Yes.
you mentioned the name of a philosopher who wanted the workers to have their land. What was his name? I didn't jot it down.
Yes. Very good. And that was my mistake, because I should have written it down on the screen. So he was called Gemisthus Platon. So I'll spell that to you. So
Yes.
Gemisthus, Gemisthus. Platon is Plethon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank you for getting me to repeat it, because I should have.
He was going to sound interesting. Then when you talked about him, I thought, oh, he does sound
Someone to go and look up and find out more about. Exactly.
Yes.
Yes.
Damien, Bob here.
Hi there, Bob. Yes, nice to see you.
Nice to see you. Yeah. So wonderful. And I just have to compliment you on the pictures. Do you do those yourself, or you're traveling with somebody?
I think almost all of them were my own, actually. Yes. I think they're all my own, actually. Yes. Well, thank you for the compliment. I'm not a great photographer, but I have learned that if you get up early in the morning and take your photographs early in the morning, they invariably look nice in the morning light. That's the only secret that I know.
Morning light.
Yeah. So thank you.
Damien.
Hello, Hazel.
What
Yes.
is-
Now, Hazel, of course, I should introduce, because you
No,
came
no,
on the
no.
trip with me. Yes. Yes.
Yes, I recognize some of those photographs, but I didn't take them. There was a beautiful one in Mistras. Mistras was where I had difficulty because it was so difficult. The shale walking was
It's
horrible. And I had
difficult
trouble
walking
there.
around.
Yeah.
Yes.
But could you tell me what Hosias Lucas means? Does it mean Saint Luke?
It does exactly mean that.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Okay, thanks.
Not at all. Yeah.
Damien?
Yes.
Yvonne?
Yvonne, yes.
I will have to agree that the pictures were absolutely extraordinary.
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Yvonne.
And it brought back so many memories of our trips to Greece. It was lovely.
Because you've traveled a lot through Greece. I know. Yes. So
yes.
Oh, that's good.
Not to all those places, but we've gotten to Metiera and all over the Peloponnesos and everything. It was so beautiful to see your pictures.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, Yvonne. That's very nice to hear. Yes. Anybody else?
Damien,
Yeah. Oh, yes, yes, Jenny. Yes, nice to see you.
Hello.
Mm.
The pictures of the Byzantine mosaics were splendid. Are there many churches in that particular area where you can see some of the mosaics? I mean, I've been to Sicily, and I was with you, and
Yes,
in Palermo, they're
yes.
superb.
I have to be honest, Jenny. They tend to be more frescoes than mosaics, which is why I honed in on those mosaics in Osius Lucas. For example, in Mistra, there are not so many mosaics. It does seem to be that the fresco work was more prevalent in throughout the mainland Greece. But what I hope is that when we travel to Constantinople next week, I will be able to show you more Byzantine mosaics from there, from, for example, the Hagia Sophia. Of course, those are the famous ones, but also from the beautiful Kora church. So, but I think, thank you for bringing that up, because it's an interesting point. There's not as many as you would expect, especially having seen the beautiful ones in Sicily, in Palermo. So thank you for mentioning that, Jenny. Yes.
Thank you for that, Damien.
Thank you. Anybody else?
Were there any links between the craftsmen who did the mosaics in Palermo and any of the craftsmen in Greece, or is that still?
Well, that is a very interesting question. If there is, I don't know of it. I think the common link was Constantinople. And certainly the craftsmen that went to do the ones in Sicily came from Constantinople, and I would imagine the ones that did the mosaics in somewhere like Osius Lucas were the same.
So book of patterns that they followed, so that
Well, it is almost as if they had that. I mean, I don't know to for sure that they did, but it is almost as if, I mean, it's the same when you go to some of the mosaics in the Kora church in Istanbul. You see the same kind of patterns. So it is as if they were following a thing. Yes. So it's an interesting point, that one. Yeah. Thank you. Angela, yes.
Damien, that very attractive and appealing design of the churches with the small domes and the tile work, that is presumably something very distinctively Greek, is it? Would you say, for the Orthodox Church? I remember seeing them in Italy, but of course they were from Greek settlements, weren't they, in southern Italy when we went there?
Yes, yes. Now, and again, I mean, that is interesting, and I'm not enough of an architectural historian to really answer the question. But I mean, of course, the whole of Constantinople, the dome of Hagia Sophia was really the pinnacle of creating a dome. I mean, that was the largest dome in the ancient world. And essentially what a dome was some way of vaulting a roof, in particular a square space. Now, it is an interesting question, this, because if you think about the churches in Italy, they tend to be built on what's known as a basilica plan. In other words, they have a nave. Now, to build a roof over a nave is quite easy, because you simply put it's a bit like a roof on the top of a house, really. You put timbers up there and put a roof on. But to put a roof on a square space is quite difficult. And the plan of a Greek church was a Greek cross. So if you think about it, it was a square with 4 more squares, one other square coming off each of the sides of the central square. That was the plan of the Greek church. So the architectural problem was, how do you put a roof on each of those squares? And the answer was to construct a dome. Now, in somewhere like Hagia Sophia, of course, that was a huge dome, but in smaller Greek churches, the ones that you find around the countryside, of course, you know, they didn't have the wherewithal to create such great spans. So I think that's what the solution is. It's simply a practical solution to a problem rather than an aesthetic one. But I think, of course, inevitably it became an aesthetic. I mean, we look at it and we think that they're very pretty, but I think originally it was a practical solution. I
Right.
might be wrong, but that's my suggestion.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anybody else? Anyone else for a last question?
Damien.
Tina? Oh, yes, Hazel, yes.
No, sorry. No, carry on. Whoever it
Well,
was.
I was going to apologize to Tina because we didn't quite get to Thessaloniki.
No.
I'm so sorry about that. But I really think that Thessaloniki is really a whole other lecture. But I don't feel I need to go to visit Thessaloniki
You have to
again.
go. Damien, you have
So
to go.
there's another trip.
Yes,
We have to go to
they have
Northern
their
Greece.
own large dome, and in fact, Castoria has about 40 plus of the small churches also, which is just west, and lots of the, you know, really tiny ones that you were noting in some of the villages.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a trip for another time. Once this all lockdown ends and
It
COVID
was
goes
really
away.
enjoyable. No, thank you. I've never been to that part of Greece, so I really enjoyed it. Thank you.
Thank you, Tina. Thank you.
I was going to
Damien,
say, Damien.
thank
oh,
you
sorry.
thank you for a lovely hour. It was wonderful.
Oh, thank you, Yvonne.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Brilliant.
Thank you. All right. Well, I think here in England, at least, it's 8 o'clock. It's time for my supper. So I'm going to say goodbye to you all.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us.
Damien.
Bye, Damien. Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.
Keep
Bye.
safe and join us next week when we will travel to Constantinople.
Okay,
And,
thanks.
see you all
Bye.
then.
Bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.